Good morning, Williamson Planet. Welcome back to my channel. Now, today we're going to talk about, and I know many of you have been waiting for this, part two of how to get rid of the thug mentality in one generation. If you don't recall all that I said in part one, please feel free to go back and watch it before watching this right here. Okay, so part two. In part one, of course, we talked a lot about the history and the creation of the culture. And what it taught us is that the culture is not just a natural thing, and it's not just how we are in the hood, so to speak. And of course, the hood is varied. The hood doesn't mean you have a bunch of thugs, etc. You have a lot of good people who are hardworking, etc. But if you look at part one, if you look at my vlog about things the hood can learn from Iceland, then you see how this becomes those are good prefaces and introductions and a good segue into what we're going to talk about today. So now, how do we fix the hood? First of all, America is the wealthiest country in the world, right? We see things on TV about how the leaders of the United Arab Emirates or in Saudi Arabia have these huge opulent houses and all this other stuff. Let me tell you something right now. Per capita, which means per person, the United States is as wealthy, if not wealthier, than all those countries. Yes, I just told you right. Okay? The United States, out of the 3,000 or so billionaires in the world, right? We have about 900 here in the United States. No other country has that many billionaires. In fact, out of the top 10 billionaires in the world, guess where they're all from? You guessed it right, the United States. America has money, right? As I mentioned in an earlier vlog, even if you look at black people, right? So in America, we have 330 million people. Of that, about a little over 40 million are African American or would list themselves as African American. Of course, we have people of mixed race, etc. So those numbers can vary depending on how people define themselves or how others define them. So our population is roughly the same size as the entire population of our neighbor to the north, Canada. Okay? And in that population, if the rest of America disappeared today, we are still one of the wealthiest countries in the world. Yes, we are. Okay, I know it's kind of hard to believe for some people, but yes, we are. And I'm talking about we being black folks, African Americans, etc. All right, so how do we get rid of the hood mentality in one generation, part two? The key is, we have several keys. The first thing is, and sometimes when I speak, you're going to hear some of my spirituality coming out because I consider myself a servant of God. So hopefully you understand that, and hopefully you are too. And if you're not, well, we are. I love the fact that we live in a free country, even though some people argue against that and that it's getting less freer every day. And I love the fact that from my belief system, my God gave us free will, and regardless of your beliefs, we are all brothers and sisters, okay? And I truly believe that, okay? And the reason why I bring up spirituality is the first part is, I'm going to quote from the Holy Bible, and where it says, without vision, a nation perishes. First thing we need is vision. We need to have an idea of what we're aiming for, right? We need not to accept the status quo as just normal in the world. That's how it is. Over there is rough, over there is whatever. That place is bad. Oh, don't walk down that street. We know how they are, etc. We have to have vision vision of a beautiful streets, clean streets, safe streets, great places for our children to play and grow up, right? The next thing we need is education. We need knowledge. And we should break down education into two parts. The first one is knowledge of oneself, so they feel that they belong, that they're part of something bigger than themselves, right? Because that helps people want to achieve a vision. The second part is actual technical education of all the many things a society needs in order to function. Now, regarding knowledge of self, I went through Trenton Public Schools since I came to Trenton when I was 6 years old, halfway through first grade. And my entire time in the Trenton Public Schools until I graduated from high school, Trenton Central High School, go Tornadoes. In that entire time, we never had one class where we talked about the problems we were facing in the hood. Not one class. I went to a predominantly black schools in Trenton, New Jersey, right? My middle school, Junior 1, which was later renamed Martin Luther King Middle School, is on Martin Luther King Boulevard in Trenton. Even though when I was there, it's just Princeton Avenue. Across is the Donnelly Page homes, which are projects, had some semi-high rises and some lower units, right? It was an area that people called a rough neighborhood or a bad neighborhood in that type of area, where people, as soon as they can afford it, a lot of them moved out. And they moved to some of the suburbs like Ewing, Firstly, or Lawrence if they made a little bit more money and that type of thing, right? And first of all, I don't believe that anywhere is bad. I think there are a lot of people who do bad things in certain places, right? But here's the bottom line right here. You think growing up in an environment like that there'll be, the whole point of education is to make a good populace, right? Don't you think you should have classes that talk to the kids about why they are where they are? Not one class talked to them about why they are where they are. We always had to depend on that one cool teacher or that one cool coach who say, yo, bro, when I was growing up, let me tell you what you need to do or whatever, right? We pay taxes. Shouldn't all the people with doctoral degrees, PhDs, EDDs, etc., start writing books about, okay, this is why you are in the hood. This is the history. This is a thing called redlining. These are all the other things right here. Not one class. So kids, human beings try to answer things themselves. If you grow up in an environment where you're not being taught things directly, right? What do you start to do? You start to come up with your own reasoning. Maybe we're just supposed to be like this. I remember growing up in Trenton, and I had friends who did think like that. I mean, most people didn't. I didn't say everybody did. But there are a lot of friends who thought, that's what being black is. And then, nigga, where you been, man? Man, you ain't being real, man. That book stuff. And one of my homeboys told me, well, you can't eat books. You know, and stuff like that, right? So all these black kids in the school, and I'm not putting down the fact, well, of course, I was going to say one of the issues is that you didn't have enough African-American teachers, right? But I'm glad for the white teachers there who really cared about the kids also, right? And many of the African-American teachers, they had very low knowledge of this stuff themselves, right? I remember in, I believe it was first grade, where these teachers talked about my family and put us down because we were immigrants and we seemed poor and we were from Jamaica. And I remember they're two African-American black women. And they assumed because I spoke with a strong accent at the time, etc., as if I'm just stupid. Like, oh, he's a 6-year-old kid and he speaks with a strong accent. He can't possibly know what we're whispering to each other about. Even though their whispering was kind of loud and they're only like 7 or 8 feet away from me, right? But that's the type of nasty attitude they had, right? So I went on to become a lawyer. I think I'm doing pretty decently well for myself, right? But that's not what they saw at the time. So they were part of the problem. And it's sad. And I say that to say that. So even when you have African-American teachers, it's not necessarily a panacea, right? Because a lot of them grew up kind of screwed up themselves. And I'm not talking about hood screw up. They grew up internalizing the same sort of an anti-black and poor people stereotype. You know, their grandparents are probably the ones who did things like brown bag tests to see if they're light enough to be good enough and that type of thing, right? And so instead of saying, trying to uplift all the kids in their communities, they actually also categorized us and treated us accordingly, okay? So when it comes to education, we have to get this education of self. We need people out there, and I'm sure there are people out there writing some books, and I remember from time to time seeing them. This is nuts. Let me tell you, first time I saw a real class that talked about these issues was in Princeton, New Jersey. I moved to Princeton. At the time when I moved there, I was 27 years old, and my fiance later became my wife and the mother of my 3 children, who unfortunately we got divorced years later. But when but that's besides the point. We moved there because we had our son at the time, and we thought we'll give him a better life in a better suburb, etc. At the time, I was working on Wall Street, and could afford to buy a pretty nice place. Bought a brand new townhouse, 3-bedroom, 2.5-bath townhouse in a brand new unit that was going up. Actually, when we bought it, it wasn't even built yet, right? So we bought it, and then later on we got married, and our 2 daughters were born after that, right? So we have our 3 children grew up there. So being in Princeton, that's background to say this right here. Later on, I became an attorney. I actually became very involved in Princeton politics, and I actually ran for council, and I was the only African American on council in Princeton at one point. But the thing is, the first time I saw a class that talked about our socioeconomic issues was in Princeton, in predominantly white, mainly upper middle class Princeton. Don't get me wrong, Princeton has a lot of regular middle class people, and Princeton also has a lot of poor people. Princeton has federally funded projects. Princeton is very progressive when it comes to affordable housing, right? And I was honored that when I was on council, I was the liaison for affordable housing, and also the council representative that helped with even our federally funded housing units, right? So the point is this right here. Here in Princeton, that's predominantly white and upper class, is the first time they had a class. They had an experimental class that talked about a lot of these issues. And I had the honor of being asked to teach one day of this class, right? But back in predominantly Black Trenton, which, by the way, over the last few decades, Trenton has grown to have a very large Hispanic population. And right now, the Trenton Public Schools is actually more Hispanic than African American as it was when I was growing up. The bottom line is, though, all these people with PhDs, Black principals, Black superintendents, all these people, and no books and classes. Well, I said no, maybe one, who knows if a teacher may have had some books somewhere about something, but no specific classes talking about why the history and the socioeconomic status of many of their students, right? Amistad legislation. Governor McGreevey, decades ago, governor of New Jersey, signed the Amistad legislation, talked about teaching Black history in schools. Barely got funded, barely got implemented. In Trenton Public Schools, I don't think got implemented at all. I remember getting into a social media discussion with some education professionals, and apparently the fact that the website mentioned Amistad seemed to suffice for the fact that no teacher was implementing it and none of the students were actually receiving it. So when I brought it up, someone said, well, it's on the website. Okay, what good is that if you're not implementing it? It's like someone dying from thirst in the desert and you said, well, we have a tank of water. It's a few miles away, so what are you talking about? Yeah, but the person's not drinking the water. Or someone dying from hunger and says, oh, well, there's a Denny's. It's a few miles away. So what are you talking about, the fact that they died from hunger? But they're not at the Denny's and they don't have the wherewithal to get to the Denny's. They're actually dying of hunger here. So the fact that a Denny's exists, stocked with food, does them no good. The fact that Amistad is mentioned on the website, if it's not being implemented and no teacher is doing it and no student is receiving it, doesn't no good. So, but I found that baffling, and especially that some of the people I thought were very conscious people. But anyway, it was weird to me. So it led me to believe there are other things going on, like territorialism and that type of thing, where people are just upset that you're talking about areas that they feel that it's supposed to be their area. But anyway, I just thought as human beings and citizens that we're supposed to contribute to doing things and doing things better. But all these are my opinions. I'm not calling any names. If anyone feels differently, they can feel free to comment, right?